Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Peter Farrell from Tamkin and Hodgeburg. I'm a special education lawyer and I represent families that have children on IEPs and 504 plans. This week has seen significant developments with the outbreak of COVID-19, and I wanted to share some of those developments with you to promote awareness and to answer some of the questions that you may have. I've received telephone calls and emails, and I thought it would be best to just Zoom is all of the rage. So here we are, and I thought I would do my best to share some of the information that's out there with you in an effort that you can share that with some other parents, and also do our best to come together during this incredibly challenging time. Here, the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus obviously has caused worldwide disruption. It has caused challenges to occur in every business sector, both in the financial markets, every industry, every profession, every family and individual. This impact has obviously been worldwide and is unprecedented. Compounding the situation is the interruption of the daily education of our children, and especially in case of our children with special needs who receive special education services. As a special needs parent, I can assure you that this is a rapidly and fluid changing environment that continues to present significant challenges for everyone. Our schedules are not people as parents who are trying to work on quarantine at home, and in particular, our partners in the education field, both educators and administrators alike, and also their attorneys. It's important that you stay informed and stay updated as there are changing recommendations daily as to what the best course of action is. I'd like to provide you with several of the published advisories and directives shared by both the U.S. Department of Education and also the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. As you probably guessed, by order of Governor Baker, this week all Massachusetts public and private schools will remain closed, and that was extended until at least May 4th of 2020. The Bureau of Special Education Appeals, that hears appeals of fair hearing requests, that agency has suspended all in-person hearings and mediations until further notice. The BSEA is currently evaluating whether holding these hearings or mediations in a virtual environment is or is not a viable option in light of current events, and they are assessing that on a case-by-case basis. Some of these directives that have come out, I'm going to share with you here. So give me a minute and I'll flip over to the PowerPoint. So here we've covered some of the orders. We've covered the Bureau of Special Education Appeals being suspended for now. But I also wanted to share with you the most important thing is that there are sources of information and updates that you really need to be aware of. Those updates come from both the United States Department of Education and also DESE. I'd suggest you really want to take a look at, if nothing else, you want to take it to remote learning recommendations that were promulgated yesterday. That's March 26th, 2020. You can get them online. I have the link there, and I'll also post them separately with this Zoom chat. So those are the sources of information. Interestingly enough, all of you have the same questions. I've been inundated with phone calls, emails, and things of that nature. People are worried certainly about what am I going to do? What about my special needs child? I will tell you that you are not alone. These questions, everyone has the same, and here's the top 8. Let's go through them one by one, and you can feel free to shoot me a note and let me know if you've got others, and I'll do my best to address those and get back to you. Number 1, during the period of time that school is closed due to COVID-19, must the district provide special education to students with disabilities? The short answer to that question is yes. During this period, schools must provide special education to students with disabilities. Significantly, while school is closed, schools have been advised to go on a remote and distance learning model. And now districts are increasingly asking schools to strike that. I said strike that. I'm a lawyer. Sorry. Schools are asking schools were asking parents and students to turn in assignments and do that all electronically. So the answer to number 1 is absolutely. Something I think that's important to point out here is that the rule of law still applies. The rule of law has not changed. And despite the fact that we're under a global health emergency, the laws still apply, both of IDEA, the school's obligation to provide FAPE, which is number 2, I'll get to in a second, and certainly the obligation to make sure that your special needs child who's on an IEP is making meaningful progress, or effective progress rather, in accessing the curriculum. So with respect to number 2, what is my school district's responsibility to provide a free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities during this period of extended school closure? It's the same as it was before. As I just mentioned, the rule of law still applies despite the chaotic world in which we currently find ourselves, okay? Number 3, parents are really looking for guidance on how often school districts should communicate with parents during this period of school closure. If you were like us, we are at the high end of that spectrum, in that we're getting too much communication, which is a little daunting as we try to find our footing. But the short answer to that question, I think, is as much as is necessary. You should feel free to reach out to your child's teacher, the special education administrator, or the principal if you are having any question about the provision of special education services to your child. Number 4, does the district need to provide all services set forth in the student's IEP? Trick question. Yes. Again, just because we have this unbelievably unprecedented, untested, and turbulent time, there is nothing that has changed with respect to the law. Despite the fact that the Department of Education, or DESE, may have come down with a guidance or with a set of best practices, the federal legislation that governs this area and its state counterparts and regulatory scheme has not changed. So I would suggest to you that, yes, the district needs to provide all services set forth in the student's IEP. Number 5 is a little bit tricky. Are students eligible for compensatory services following these extended closures? That is certainly something that we are going to take a very careful look at. Part of the reason for that is we just don't know whether this migration to a remote and distance learning model is going to work. I think you know that as you're trying this week to educate your students, work, hold your household together, and do everything possible to make sure that your students are seeking the right guidance in this remote and mostly online environment. I think that that's something that we're going to take a careful look at. So when you look at all of these questions in particular, I think number 5 is the one that you're going to want to pay the most attention to. Whether or not students are eligible for compensatory services. There also has some legal challenges to that, which I will get to later on in some of these comments and answering more of the issues pertaining to number 5, particularly around what happens when you accept remote special education services and whether or not that acts as a waiver, which I'll get to. It's a little more of a complicated and extended answer. Number 6, if the district provides some or all of the services to a student with an IEP, must the district also provide additional services or compensatory services when school resumes? That's the related question. Okay. Number 7, what types of services can be provided remotely? We're going to find out. And I think that we are starting to see what services can and can't be provided remotely. There are some significant licensing challenges, particularly relating to occupational therapy, physical therapy, things of that nature. Those are obviously somewhat of a hands-on professional licensure issue that will ultimately need to be addressed. And I believe the answer to that question is those services, unless and until there's some action taken, those are services that are going to be quite limited and that cannot be done in a remote distance learning model. Okay. Number 8 is probably the most, these aren't in any particular order, but these are the questions that all parents are, pay close attention to if you're up on all of your special education rules and regulations. How are districts going to hold team meetings, adhere to timelines, and other procedural requirements during this time? The short answer is, as they always did and as they always do. Notwithstanding that school is closed, educators are working feverishly not only to educate children, but they're also working to provide a continuity of care, really, and holding team meetings. That's going to be either telephonically or through Zoom, and adhering to timelines and other procedural requirements. It's important that you make sure that your school is adhering to those timelines, notwithstanding that the virus outbreak. Those are all important things for when school starts. You want to make sure that you hit the ground running. Okay. Um, some of the things that have come up already, these are challenges, unknowns, and variables. Remote and distance learning, I describe it really as a slippery slope. I'm concerned about it. I'm a trained skeptic. That's what I do for a living. It's not a replacement for in-classroom teaching and learning, in particularly not at the elementary level. We don't want to get to the point of not um, having elementary school kids in particular, middle school kids, maybe high school kids can go to an online environment. Certainly there are online courses. I think you're going to see more and more of that. But at the end of the day, special education through a remote and distance learning environment is a very slippery slope. We need to really guard against how much that is adopted when all the dust settles and this virus is in our rearview mirror. Okay. Another key challenge that I think everyone understands, remote or distance learning in this virtual environment, by its very nature, it's not accessible. It's not accessible in the same manner to all students in an equitable and equal fashion. Okay, then we talked about anti-discrimination laws, particularly Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think one of the things that we really want to pay attention to is that this remote and distance learning is in primarily an online environment. And literally, there will be students that have difficulty in accessing the curriculum in the computer, things of that nature. Obviously, with special education, there's a need for measurable progress, and that progress needs to be effective progress. So one, the student has to access their curriculum, and two, there needs to be a need for measurable and effective progress. How are we going to do that in a virtual or remote / distance learning? Okay. Another thing that is going to be a challenge, I don't know about you all, but there's a reason I didn't become a teacher. I think very highly of teachers. My colleagues are teachers. I have friends who are teachers. I serve on the board at two schools with very talented, gifted, and dedicated educators. In the home environment and in the remote and distance learning environment, having staffing and duly qualified educators and specialists, in particular for special education, that is a tall order to fill. Certainly, we as parents, we're smart people. We survived having children. Certainly, we can survive teaching 5th grade math. Not so. Some of you may have experienced that already. But when you have kids that have special needs, it's very challenging in that you need to make sure that you're providing for them and that they're making effective progress. We're not always qualified to do that. We certainly know a lot about our children, but also how to teach them and how to make the most impact. I certainly look to my daughter's teachers to help me with that. Lastly, a practical tip from what we're all experiencing in the strain of this week, parental supervision. Most of children, particularly at the elementary age, are those that have attention challenges, ADHD, those students that have some difficulties with executive function and attending to their work, kids with autism, et cetera. Parental supervision is a challenge in these times, and the demands put on the students to do the work, turn in the work, and then some schools and districts and teachers are grading the work, which I'll also address in a minute. Parental supervision and work life and quarantine at home is wreaking havoc, and that's certainly a challenge, an unknown, and a variable, excuse me, that we're going to need to address as this drags on. Here's some of the legal stuff that we've already identified early on. I mean, these directives came out as recently as yesterday. Challenges to the remote or distance learning model. We really don't know if this is going to work. This is what we have. It's not perfect. There's not a lot of things on earth that are perfect. And I credit the educators, the teachers, and curriculum coordinators at our school and elsewhere for rolling this out, and certainly the department. But is this going to work? We really don't know. We're going to give it our best shot, and we're going to roll it out and see what happens. What impact will the acceptance of remote learning services have on our ability to claim a denial of FAPE or lack of effective progress down the road? Again, we don't know that. Being a lawyer, I'd suggest that the best way here is to protect your rights. Protect your rights and realize that the acceptance of remote and distance learning services does not and shall not operate as a waiver. You want to state that. You want to be upfront and state that and express that in an email, in a notice, and we need to make sure that that's known. I can tell you, the next bullet point. There is an acknowledgement by district administrators and the school's attorneys. Districts are already looking for cover. Yeah, there are conversations happening that you may not know about right now where districts are looking for hold harmless agreements or being what's called indemnified from any claims by students via their parents or guardians or caregivers that they're not providing a free and appropriate public education. In my opinion, guys, honestly, I think that's a little, those conversations are premature. Also think it's a little abhorrent that there's plans being made for that when you as parents don't have access to attorneys to plan or to advise you on the fly. Where the focus really needs to be right now is on students with disabilities, getting them special education services and making sure that they're getting an education. We can look for cover and deal with the legal stuff later, but I can tell you right now, be very, very mindful of your acceptance of remote and distance learning services and make sure that you make it known that you're not waiving any rights down the road to challenge or claim a denial of FAPE or lack of effective progress simply because you accepted services. Okay. You are likely going to get a notice, probably from DESE or the school principal or the special education administrator advising that they're going to a remote or distance learning model. Read that notice very carefully and act accordingly. Okay. There's also been an acknowledgement by DESE and by people that are on the school side of this discussion. And it is a discussion. This isn't meant to be an adversary process. We're all rowing a similar boat. We don't really know the destination. But there has been an acknowledgement of known hurdles, unknowns, and untested outcomes. This is the first time that we've ever done this. We're doing it on the fly, and we're going to give it our best shot. So, leaving you with a couple of takeaways. It's important that you stay tuned. You can check in here with me on my social media channels. Tamkin and Hochberg's COVID-19 resource guide on our website at tamkinhochberg.com. It's important that you stay informed. We're trying to limit certainly our intake and consumption of news and social media these days. I think that's important, both for mental health of your children and certainly ours as parents. It's also critically important that you stay healthy. And you need to really check in regularly with your child's teachers, administrators, their specialists, whether it's PT, OT, particularly their mental health person, whether it's the school adjustment counselor or psychologist, and other parents. We are all rowing this boat together. And, if you're having a tough time, as you saw from the everyone has the same questions slide, everyone's having the same time as you, and you're in good company. Now more than ever, it's important to stay connected. Cutting down on consumption of news and social media, as I mentioned, that's up to you. I used to watch a lot of news. I do about a minute a day. I kind of know what's happening, and then I, go about my work and teaching and being the Girl Scout leader and trying to hold things together like everyone else. Lastly, engage. If you have questions, I may hold a Facebook Live. I've gotten some requests to do that and answer some Q&As just as we progress here and confront new and issues in common. So stay tuned to my social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn for updates and a scheduled Q&A, which I'll probably get to early next week. These are challenging times. Make no mistake about it. I think that as we go into the weekend here, I think we're going to see, we are going to settle in and we're going to be just fine. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm happy to chat with you and provide any other information that and to kind of be a depository for these things. These are important updates. We have difficult lives to begin with, and we've been through worse. We'll get through this too. Enjoy the weekend and see you soon. Take care.